Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. Folks, we're revisiting, of course, the shooting in Lewiston, Maine, Robert Card. And as the investigators dig deeper into this, it winds up that many mistakes were made in this case. And in that way, really, the police knew all about this, and other authorities knew about this. And a lot of confusion as to who takes responsibility and who now should be taking responsibility. And we know right here, those are the 18 people that died because the right thing wasn't done in this case. And I don't say that lightly. I don't point blame at anyone lightly, but it's irrefutable in this case that deadly mistakes were made, very deadly mistakes. And Maine, according to the New York Times, is a rare Democratic-controlled state with loose gun laws. The mass shooting that killed at least 18 people on Wednesday occurred in a state with a record of resisting gun restrictions. Just months before this week's mass shooting in Lewiston, Maine, the legislature considered three major bills to tighten gun restrictions. One to require criminal background checks for gun purchases, another to create a 72-hour waiting period before someone could take possession of a gun after purchasing it, and third, to outlaw modifications that make semi-automatic weapons more deadly. All three bills were defeated in the Maine Senate by sizable margins. Maine is a largely blue state where Democrats control both chambers of the state legislature, and the governorship has a long history of resisting gun control measures. The shootings in Lewiston on Wednesday that left 18 people dead are already fueling renewed calls from gun control groups to expand firearm restrictions in Maine. But much of the state's political power base, which is rooted in rural communities in the state's north and western mountains, is unlikely to be swayed, said Mark Brewer, a political science professor at the University of Maine. Again, this is according to an article in the New York Times. In regions where hunting is a big part of the culture, if you're going to talk about restricting gun rights, Mr. Brewer said, you are going to have a hard time. The authorities have not made public any information about what type of firearm was used in Lewiston shootings on Wednesday, nor anything about how the weapon was obtained. Everytown for Gun Safety, a group that advocates for tighter restrictions on guns, ranks Maine 25th in the nation in the strictness of its gun laws, with more permissive laws than nearby Massachusetts, Vermont, and Connecticut. In the region, only New Hampshire has a lower ranking than Maine. When you look at the track record of Maine, it stands out that the state has rejected at every juncture common sense gun laws that make communities safer, said John Feinblatt, president of Everytown. The debate over gun control flared earlier this year when a man who had recently been released from prison killed his parents and two friends and shot at motorists on a highway in April in Cumberland and Sagadaw counties. Opponents of stricter gun regulations said the incident showed that laws such as barring felons like the gunman from possessing firearms do not help prevent violence. So, folks, again, Maine is a state that is big-time hunting state, and they turn down stricter gun control laws, as do many states. But in this instance, what we're going to see in tonight's show is we're going to see a failure in the yellow flag laws, a failure in the red flag laws, a failure of law enforcement, a failure of the Army, who were sort of the guardians of this shooter, Robert Card, and a failure on so many levels that led to 18 people being shot dead. And we across this nation are tired of seeing these active shooters. And that's what we're going to discuss this evening. What could have been done, what wasn't done. So, folks, hang on to your seats, buckle yourself in. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone with Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories.
There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch, Michael Byler.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
Folks, joining me tonight to discuss this very complicated topic, and it is complicated, is Professor, retired NYPD Sergeant, law degree, and straight out of the Bronx, I should say. Welcome to the show, Professor Mike Geary. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, Bill. Good evening. Thank you for having me on.
Mike, I don't want to at all try to make this simple because it's not. And we talk about yellow flag laws, red flag laws. There are a lot of restrictions that law enforcement is held back by. And I was on Duty Ron's show last week, and I said, these laws collide with HIPAA laws, confidentiality, and the real law. And that's the confusion in here. And that's where something has to be done so these tragedies don't happen as often as they have been happening.
Yeah, Billy, a lot of times you get urge for red flag laws, and that's a big thing. You always hear people talking about red flag laws. We need red flag laws. We need to enforce red flag laws. However, people don't realize that red flag laws are different in each state, and sometimes it really conflicts with the idea of patient confidentiality. If someone has a mental illness, it doesn't mean that they are a danger to the public. Many people, statistically, 15% of the public may have a diagnosable mental illness. Some of the listeners out here may have a diagnosable mental illness and be dealing with it. And they pose absolutely no danger to the public. And so, and many of the people may have a handgun for their safety. They may have a handgun for maybe a job that they have. And so therefore they have a right to that firearm so long as that they're following the law and obeying the law. So the idea that there is, privacy in these people's lives, and that should not be disclosed to like the state police, or have the state police come by their house and determine whether or not they are fit to have a firearm, to get a firearm, to keep a firearm that they already have. That's not good, because people have the right to their medical records. They have the right to patient confidentiality. I don't think anybody would, no matter how much you may not like guns and want very strict red flag laws, does anybody here really want their doctor, if they tell their doctor that they're a little depressed or something, their doctor to go to the FBI and say, oh, by the way, I have a patient, and they've expressed a feeling that they are, they have a mental health condition. I'm treating them, but they've never said they're going to hurt anybody. But I think that they shouldn't ever have access to a firearm. That's a little strange. That's a little ridiculous. And I think that's a problem, because these ideas that politicians have, these great intentions, these laws, there's state laws, there's state, privacy laws and regarding patient confidentiality, there's federal laws, HIPAA, you've got the, and you've got the idea of civil commitment and taking away people's property. Everyone's entitled to a hearing. So there's a convergence of many different kinds of laws, and they are in conflict, and there's often a lot of court cases involved. There's a lot of litigation involved in this. And, as someone said recently, you can have all the laws you want, but if they're not enforced or if they're not effective, then it's not gonna do what the law was intended to do.
You know, Mike, the Maine director of public safety, Mike Sawstruck, he had brought that same point that you just raised, that there are many people, even on the police department,
Mhm.
that have diagnosed mental illnesses.
Sure.
And they don't remove their firearms from them unless they're a danger to themselves and others. And that's a difficult plateau
Mhm.
for a diagnosis of, yeah, he's a danger to himself and others. I remember on the NYPD, the mere allegation to someone saying that about you, they would take your guns, throw you in a penalty box, maybe for like a year,
Oh yeah.
until you could prove that you weren't a danger to yourself and others. But so there are people, and therein lies the toughness of a psychiatrist, a psychologist saying, with these yellow flag or red flags, yes, he's a danger or she's a danger to herself and others. And I believe if you don't remove the firearms, and they should never ever possess firearms again in their entire life, that they're a danger to themselves and others.
Yeah, I remember, Billy, what you're talking about years ago in the NYPD. If you were a police officer and you were going through a nasty divorce or something like that with a spouse, and they alleged to internal affairs that you made a threat, whether or not it happened or not, and they would take your guns away, and you'd be put in what we call the rubber gun squad, the bow and
Yes.
arrow squad. You know,
The police department always had such really kind ways to put it, you know.
oh, it
Yeah,
was
you're in the
terrible.
bow and arrow squad. You're in the rubber gun squad.
It was terrible. It was terrible.
Yeah, it was
And you
terrible.
wouldn't be allowed on patrol. You couldn't make an arrest. You'd just be like, sweeping up the floors in the precinct. And it's demeaning. And it would take years before they would ever clear you to go back to patrol. And that is a real huge economic hit. And that's going to be on your record forever. So if there's ever any sort of promotion possibility, that's going to affect it. If you want to go into detective division or something like that, or transfer to a nicer command, or perhaps if you made sergeant, would that affect you? If you are third grade detective, would you be promoted to second grade detective? If there's any sort of allegation in your past, about mental instability, and again, it didn't even have to be proven. They would just hold your guns
Mere
for
allegation.
as long as they felt.
Mike, and it was also true for alcoholism. If you went,
Sure.
and again, the police department used very kind words to you for that too. You're going to the farm. It wasn't a farm. It wasn't a farm. It was upstate where there were horses and cows, so they called it the farm. And everyone knew that was the language they use. Oh, he's going to the farm, and that had certain implications in it too. Mike, I just want to bring up the topic. The media has been very, very tough in digging and, again, pointing fingers and allegations. I guess they should be, because it seems like in this case, this could have been prevented if it was done by the numbers, and it wasn't. And as a result, right now, we have 18 people dead, 13 people wounded. I want to play this from CNN.
On the mass shooter in Maine, Robert Card, just weeks before the attacks last Wednesday in Lewiston. This came after a fellow National Guardsman expressed concern that he would, quote, snap and commit a mass shooting. Card was found dead Friday from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. His body was discovered inside of a box trailer belonging to a recycling facility that had been he had recently been fired from. Shimon joins us live from Portland, Maine, with this reporting. I was so struck when your reporting crossed, reading it, that there seemed to be multiple warning signs in weeks ago.
And really, Poppy, what this now raises, of course, if the officers here, the sheriff's officers who were investigating these threats, had they intervened sooner, could this have been prevented?
Just weeks before he went on a rampage, killing 18 people, the Maine National Guard asked local authorities to initiate a wellness check on Robert Card. A source telling CNN one National Guardsman was concerned Card is going to snap and commit a mass shooting. The Saginaw County Sheriff's Office went to the former reservist's home twice. A source telling CNN he wasn't home during one of those visits, prompting the sergeant who tried to check on him to send out a missing persons report. The other visit was on September 16th. This time they believed he was home. Card could be heard moving inside the trailer, but would not answer the door. Officers left without making contact.
Wow. That part of it I don't like. They received information that he was going to shoot up something. They conceivably, they don't know because they didn't see him, but they believe they heard him.
Right.
And they left the scene. I think that was the time that they should have gone on the radio and said, could we get an emergency service team here? We're going to a firearms removal from a mental patient. I mean, at the very least, I think if I was that sergeant on the scene, I wouldn't have felt confident walking away from that. And the first time the sergeant had an encounter, he did something very smart. He wrote a missing persons report on this guy because this guy made a threat.
Right.
So he's going to cover his ass. We used to say, cover your ass in paper.
CYA.
Yeah. And he covered it with a missing persons report. Now they go there and they think they hear him, but they leave. Your thoughts?
Billy, yeah. You get this report from Army authorities that he's made a threat. They go to the house to do a wellness check on him. They know there was a threat. They didn't actually probably talk to the soldiers themselves, but they knew there was a threat. The Army communicated with them. They went over there with the purpose of seeing him, checking him out. Now they know he's in there. Okay. At that point, I would not turn my back on this person and get back into my car and go away. I think you should call the emergency service. You should try to communicate with this person. I think at this point, because of the threat and because of the fact that he probably had firearms there, that I would consider that akin to like an emergency situation, because this person may be at this point, if you don't do something, or as you're doing something, they're barricaded, as we'd call EDP, emotionally disturbed person in New York City parlance. I think you need to get eyes on that person and eyes in that trailer. And if he makes any other threats, verbalizes any other threats to the police there, at the very least, you got the place surrounded. The very worst, I would get a search warrant and go in and go in as fast as you can.
Mike, I think you're right. I don't think you need a search warrant. I think this is an emergency exception to a search warrant. I cannot believe they walked away from this.
I wouldn't turn my back on that guy and get back.
No, but I mean, I also couldn't leave that job and go home that night to my family and say, oh, I did the right thing by that guy who's threatening to shoot up the entire neighborhood. I wouldn't feel confident that I did my job. And that's why I would have went the next step and called emergency service. And for you folks outside of New York City, what that is, they call it in other parts of the country, SWAT. Right. Or special weapons and tactics. In New York City, we call it emergency service. And they would be able to confront this guy. We have hostage negotiators. They have tactics that they could confront this situation. But walking away from it, I wouldn't have felt confident with that. And this is one of the first times of many times that they didn't do the right thing with this case.
Deciding, due to being in a very disadvantageous position, we decided to back away.
Wow. That to me is amazing. Let's play that again. That I cannot even believe.
Very disadvantageous position, we decided to back away. Sources tell.
If you're in a disadvantageous position, then get other people there that will give you the advantage.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And if you feel like you're in a disadvantageous position, that means you're in actual fear of your life. So obviously you're in a very possibly armed confrontational situation. You're not investigating a bunch of Boy Scouts running around stealing the Girl Scout cookies. No, this is a guy who's got firearms and who's made verbal threats to people. And the Army is telling you, they're having issues with them. They're communicating with you. That's a feeling of danger. He's verbalizing. They had a feeling of danger and they backed off. You can't do that as a police officer. I'm sorry, you can't do that.
No.
Telling CNN a Saginaw County Sheriff's deputy spoke to his brother on September 17th. He told authorities he and his father would work with Robert to make sure he does not have any other firearms. It's unclear if any further action was taken after that, and a source told CNN the case appears to have been closed on October 1st, 24 days before the shooting. According to sources, the Maine National Guard initiated a wellness check because the reservists started hearing voices in the spring and say they had only gotten worse. The National Guard also informed the Saginaw County Sheriff's Office of his history of mental illness, including his stay at a psychiatric facility in July. According to a source, the National Guard was trying to get him to retire under the condition that he get mental health treatment. CNN started raising questions early on in the investigation.
As you stand here today, was law enforcement notified of the threats that he was making, of his condition?
I won't answer to any comments that she made, but based on what I've seen, we're going to continue to work through that.
A spokesperson for state police telling CNN Sunday, DPS has no regulatory authority over law enforcement agencies in Maine.
This man off the streets, the sheriff here, the Saginaw sheriff, has refused to answer our questions. We went to his home yesterday. His wife telling us he was done answering questions. And obviously, we've been asking investigators here about this, all of them refusing to answer any of our questions. And it was only because of officials here, brave sources who came forward, who felt that officials here were not being transparent about what happened in the lead up to this horrific event. They came forward with this information. And now, obviously, there are many, many questions to be asked about what officials here, what the investigators were doing during this time period.
And we know you won't stop asking them. Shimon, thank you very much.
Well, just days after the shooting rampage in Lewiston, Maine that left 18 dead and 13 more injured, more deadly shootings took place over the weekend in Indianapolis.
You know, one of the things, Mike, I think that in these active shooter incidents are very unique and need to be categorized separate from these urban shootings.
Sure.
Where they're over disputes, they're over robberies, there are fights at a party. They're very different. It's a very different category of shooting. It's not the same thing. An active shooter is very specific, and it's defined as someone who goes into a location for no apparent reason and just randomly kills people, and they're not stopped until there's the law enforcement or someone shoots them or they kill themselves, which happened in this. Unfortunately, it happened here after he had already killed 18 people and injured 13. So I think that they have to separate these different types of shootings, because it doesn't help just to categorize all these shootings in the same category. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Bill, I agree. We've seen weekends in Chicago where they'll have, 75 shootings, 80 shootings over the course of a weekend. And they'll all be gang related, drug related, robbery related, burglary related. And there'll be gangs of people shooting it out like the OK Corral, 3 or 4 people going at it against each other in the street. That's a totally different animal, in terms of criminal justice than the shooter like Mr. Card. And it should be treated differently, because he is a different actor than them.
Absolutely. This is Mike. This is the same reporter from CNN who confronted the Maine governor, Janet Mills, and he has every right as a reporter to confront. I just felt he was very, very rude, very, very pushy, and perhaps at the press conference, you can ask he pushed a little too hard. I just thought that, look, these questions need to be answered. Absolutely, absolutely, and the tough questions have to be asked. Let's just watch a little bit of this here.
Maine Governor Janet Mills just finished giving an update on the response to the mass shooting in Lewiston over the weekend. We have CNN Shimon Prokupez, who is in Maine. This was pretty notable. A lot of frustration in the room during this press conference, Shimon.
Yeah, certainly, because there's still so many questions that need to be answered. And really what we're dealing with now is the weeks leading up to this and what was going on with the shooter. We know from our new reporting that law enforcement was aware that he was having some kind of a mental difficulties, that there was potentially threats of a mass shooting, of violence. We've learned in the last few days that actually a sheriff's deputy went to the home of the shooter to do an investigation because someone in the military called them and said, we're concerned about this. But what we don't know is what happens after that, what steps are taken to try and locate the shooter. And then now we know what happens. And these are the questions that we just posed to the governor. What does she know? And what was her reaction to all that? Take a listen to her response.
Information that was received by local police that they had about the shooter that they did not share with federal authorities.
Governor, you really don't know what we're talking about? Is that where you're going to stand here and tell us? Governor, everyone here wants to know that answer.
This needs to be answered.
Yeah, Governor. I'm sorry. It is, but these are.
This is something you should know.
No, but this is something you should be able to. But also, we know that there is an alarming concern from the law enforcement community that activity and information here was ignored. And the simple answer is, why was that done? And are you concerned about that?
I think those kinds of facts are yet to be determined. You're making assumptions. I'm not making assumptions.
And so there you go, right? You have the governor there. She really wasn't willing to answer any of the questions concerning the investigation. Her concerns over the fact that maybe law enforcement here missed items of information that could have prevented this from happening. I know from talking to law enforcement officials here in Maine and outside of Maine that are aware of this, that there is so much concern over the fact that there was enough evidence here, they believe, enough information to warrant further investigation, perhaps more action by the local police department, and it just wasn't taken. And we just want the governor's reaction to it. Look, she is the governor of this state. For all purposes, she's in charge of this investigation. She runs the state police. They report to her. So all we simply want to know is, what does she know? And, really, this is about getting some answers, right, for this community, for people who have been affected by this, but also law enforcement wants to know. Folks that are not living here, outside of here, they want to know what steps were missed, where were the mistakes made, and if there were no mistakes, then that's fine, but someone needs to talk about it. And this has been something that they've not wanted to answer for days now. The day after this incident, there were questions about this, about the law enforcement contact with the shooter. They basically ignored those questions. And now, as we see from the governor, all the way to the top of this state, continuing to ignore the questions and refusing to answer them.
Yeah, this didn't come out of nowhere. And I think that was really what we heard you and a number of reporters, including local reporters there in Maine, demanding of the governor. Shimon, thank you so much for that.
Mike, we know certain things, and we started this show off. We're not taking law enforcement's side. There were real red flags missed, real kites that were missed. And one, the National Guard notifies the police. This guy's got severe mental health issues. He goes into a hospital over the summer for 2 weeks, basically not forcibly, but recommended by the National Guard to do so.
Right.
At that point, shouldn't have all his firearms been sort of removed from him? Looked into how many does he own? Let's correspond with his family. How many firearms does he own? Where does he keep them? Coordinate with the police department to remove these firearms. Now, the police are notified by the National Guard. They go to his home. First time he's not there, the sergeant smartly covers himself with paper, as we used to say, writes out a missing person report. We're looking for this man because he's a danger to himself and others. An allegation by the National Guard, who is his employer, that he's threatened to shoot up the National Guard. And the sergeant, on the first visit to his home, he's not there. They write up a missing person. The second time they go there, they believe he's there. They hear him inside a trailer or inside his house. They choose to walk away. That is baffling to me. between all of this, and I don't have the exact chronology, the family notifies the police that he's got severe mental health issues. He's hearing voices. Still nothing. Mike, please help me here.
Yeah, Bill, there was so many lost opportunities, missed opportunities to get Mr. Card the help he needed and to get those guns away from him. When he was in the Veterans Administration Hospital, the Veterans Hospital, I'm not sure if it's a VA hospital in Westchester or not, near Camp Smith, but he was in the hospital. Was the family ever notified? And if they were, they could have gone to his trailer and removed the firearms themselves and maybe turned them into the local police for invoicing, that sort of thing. That didn't happen. They did the wellness check, and nothing came of that, even though they knew what had happened with this person. I think because of the fact that he went, quote unquote, voluntarily into a mental health facility, he wasn't a forcible commitment under Maine law. I don't think that they could take his guns away. However, there was a lot of opportunities there between the Army, the hospital where he was, with the local sheriffs going there, and if they had worked a little bit more in conjunction with the family, everyone could have been assured that whatever was going on with him, he could be released from the hospital with medication. And whatever happened in the future, we wouldn't know, but at least he would not have had that opportunity to use a firearm because they would have been taken away. It's, you can have all the laws on the books you want, but sometimes the system fails, and this system failed. It failed the people of Maine. It failed Mr. Card's family. It failed those 18 people and the other people who were wounded. And it's a cluster freak. And I think the governor doesn't want to point fingers yet. I understand her feelings. Was a reporter a little bit over the top? Yeah. However, this is why governors should leave the press conferences to the law enforcement people who are involved, who may at least give you some little bit more information. She wants the FaceTime, but yet here she is getting some rude questions. And you got to, if you want to be the governor, you got to take the heat. And so you're going to get these kinds of aggressive questions from reporters. And you know what? Being an aggressive reporter is not necessarily a bad thing. We may dicker a little bit about how we approach the governor, but his job is to get questions answered.
Absolutely. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime, true crime from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you give us a thumbs up and ring that bell. If you want to contribute to us, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels. We also have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels. And you see the folks in the green font. They are part of our YouTube channel family, friends, and subscribers. We really appreciate all of them. This is such a heartbreaking case. And especially, we look at a lot of these cases, and there always seems to be missed opportunities. The Boston Marathon bombers, the FBI knew who they were before the bombings occurred. Yet they weren't, no one was surveilling them. No one was watching them. And look what they did. And some of these other active shooter cases, people are notified. So the system seems to be working in the notification process, but however, there's mistakes, and you can't even, these are bigger than mistakes because they're unforgivable mistakes. When 18 people are killed, you can't just call that a mistake. Is it a forced error? No, They had opportunities to prevent this, and they did not do it.
Just 5 nights ago, a gunman changed our state forever, claiming the lives of 18 people and injuring 13 others. As many of us tried to start the new week and get back to normal, we were reminded this is not normal. In fact, it's really hard. One of the hardest parts is all of the questions that are still unanswered. But tonight we're learning new information that's shedding new light on how the mass shooter slipped through the cracks despite several warnings. Zach Merchant breaks down the latest details.
Tonight, Saginaw Sheriff Joel Mary out with new public comments admitting his office was first warned about Robert Card 5 months ago, but gave up their search.
Wow. Yeah. 5 months ago, they knew about this guy. Mike, your thoughts? You're an attorney. 5 months ago. What does that do? And let's go to a whole different area. What does that do about liability? Does that not make the government liable that they knew about this guy 5 months ago and nothing was done? Show us what you did, law enforcement.
Yeah, law enforcement has what they call qualified immunity, not complete immunity from damages caused by their actions. However, and that's for law enforcement, you actually need qualified immunity so that you can actually perform your duties the way you're supposed to. So you cannot be harassed to death by people you arrest, suing you. So it's qualified immunity is a good thing for law enforcement. However, qualified immunity does not cover you for everything you do. If you commit acts of gross negligence, then your gross negligence will not be covered by the idea of qualified immunity. That will make you liable, personally liable, and your municipality, whoever employs you, liable also. In this case, it just from what we're looking at right now, it appears that there will be many people, at least 18 families, who are going to charge the sheriff's office and the sheriffs who came in, the sheriff under the deputies who came into contact with this situation with gross negligence and sue them under state law. It's you don't want to be in that sheriff's department. You don't want to be anyone right now attached to this investigation that took part in any sort of actions that affected Mr. Card in any way, because your ass is grass and somebody's going to be the lawnmower, and it's going to be these families are going to have their piece from you. And so therefore, if this is gross negligence, and it appears to be prima facie, they're in deep shit.
Mike, as a sergeant, 22 years out of my 27 years on the police department, I would go to jobs and I could not leave a job unless I was satisfied that I made the right decision at that job. And if I wasn't sure, I would call someone that outranked me, or even call someone to the scene, call a lieutenant or call the duty captain to the scene. This is what I got. What do you think? I certainly would never, ever have walked away from Robert Card inside his house and left there with the information that I had. I could not go home and sleep at night with that information. And of course, none of us have a crystal ball and say, oh, because I failed to act, this guy's going to shoot 18 people and wound 13 others. Of course, no one could have predicted that. But, a good indication of people's behavior is their past behavior, right? Mm-hmm. And his past behavior, he had some mental illness, and he was a firearms instructor. Good things don't mix with mental illness and being a firearms instructor.
Yeah, the sad thing about the whole thing is this whole situation is the family, mentioned to the police that he had been hearing voices since at least perhaps last Christmas, early last January. So we're talking 10 months, at least 10 months. And they got worse and worse and worse. And then when he was in training with the National Guard, he actually verbalized. It wasn't like he just had a bad day and he's hard to get along with. No, he actually verbalized his desire to actually shoot people. So it went from a theoretical thing to, no, he's actually telling you that he wants to shoot somebody.
He's telling people what he's going to do.
Yeah.
If someone tells you what they're going to do, believe them. Believe them.
Right. They're telling you what they want to do if they can get their hands on a firearm. His MOS was, I think, fuel dispensing specialist. He wasn't in like the basic infantry unit as an infantry specialist or something like that. But he still is on a military base, and he does have access to weapons. And the Army did the prudent thing by suspending his ability to go anywhere near firearms and making him leave and go get checked out in a mental health facility. But beyond that, and they actually communicated with civilian law enforcement. But this had been going on for months, not just, well, he mentioned it once in a telephone call to his girlfriend that he was going to shoot somebody. No, this was going on and on and on. And that's where no one picked up on it enough to actually make sure that the people of Maine were safe.
Without ever making face-to-face contact. Here are the big takeaways, according to the sheriff. The shooter's family first alerted the sheriff's office on May 3rd, saying his mental health was declining and he had access to guns. A sheriff's office deputy then spoke to Card's Army Reserve unit and the family, who said they'd get Card medical attention. But by September, Card's Army Reserve unit in Saco asked the sheriff's office for a wellness check on Card. Deputies visited his house twice and knocked on the door. On one occasion, his car was at the trailer home, and a deputy thought he heard someone moving around inside, but nobody answered the door, and the deputies left. Card's Army Reserve unit commander then told deputies that Card no longer had access to weapons from that unit and said he thought it was best for Card to have some time to himself. By September 17th, Card's brother told deputies that the family would try to secure any guns Card might have access to. Deputies asked the family to call if they thought Card was a risk to himself or others, and then closed their search for him. According to the statement, deputies never made face-to-face contact with Robert Card. 1 month later, he committed the worst mass shooting in Maine's history.
I know myself and all of us we know somebody that was affected, and it's just important to be here for each other.
The sheriff says he believes his agency acted appropriately, but his office will be evaluating its policies for the future.
Well, I don't think that they did act appropriately. I think that they missed numerous opportunities to do the right thing, and as a result of the word we love in the law, omission,
right?
Not commission, the acts of omission created the perfect storm for Robert Card to do what he did.
Yeah, Bill, I think the sheriff is just trying to put the best face on this at this point, because I'm sure he himself is doing an investigation. The governor's doing an investigation, the state police is doing an investigation, the county sheriffs, everybody's doing their own internal investigations. And I don't think he wants to hang anyone out to dry at this point, and just putting the best face he can on this. But I think he knows that what the deputies did was lacking, and not making face-to-face contact, not getting into that trailer to see if he had weapons after their threats had been made and his family had been contacted. You can make up excuses and rationalize it and say, well, okay, well, we did act appropriately. However, hindsight is 20/20, and unfortunately, we don't live life in that way. It's always prospectively what's going to happen. But yeah, not actually seeing him and getting into that trailer, which would not have been a big move to make. It's not, you knew where he was. It wasn't like he was out in the woods and he's a survivalist and you're looking for him for 30 days and then maybe after 30 days you give up. No, we know exactly where he is. He's in there. His car's there. You have to lay eyes on this guy. I think they were hesitant, They felt a little at a disadvantage, as was said, and they backed away. Maybe they thought they'd come back another day. I don't know. It's not good for anyone in that department, and I feel bad for the sheriff because he's just putting the best spin on terrible news.
Absolutely.
Well, first of all, let me say that I think it is more important that we ban very high capacity magazines. I think that would have more input and more effectiveness. We had an assault weapon ban, which I supported, that was in effect for 10 years. It applied to, I believe, 17 or 19 styles of weapons. Later, the late Senator Dianne Feinstein proposed an expansion that would have covered 157 weapons. And it was based not on functionality, but on cosmetic features. So there's always more that we can do. I was a co-author of the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which provided funding, for example, for red and yellow flag laws and for mental health clinics, which I think is important as well. So certainly there's always more that can be done.
Senator, a decade ago, though, you opposed legislation that limited access to expanded, stocks and firearms capacity. Are you suggesting that you would do something different now?
I don't believe you're correct. For example, I was the lead Republican sponsor of a bill that would ban bump stocks, which have the ability to turn a semi-automatic into a fully automatic.
I don't think a bump stock was the issue here.
No.
I think, and their favorite is high capacity magazines. And, I don't know. Obviously, he shot a lot of rounds, and he did have high capacity magazines. I don't know if that in itself is going to prevent or stop the amount of people that you could kill in these situations. But it gets this is a Democratic state. It's a blue state, Maine. However, as we opened up the show with, it's a hunting state, and people want their guns and they don't want government restriction on their guns. Will this situation change anything? I think that, if you watch the news, you listen to the news, I think there's an active shooter incident every 2 to 3 weeks in this country. And I think that we mentioned earlier, we don't want to confuse these urban setting shootings that are robberies or disputes or with what an active shooter is. It's very different, but they're starting to do that. And it can get very confusing. An active shooter is defined as a person that goes into a location and just shoots the location up for no apparent reason and is not stopped until he's either stopped by the police or an innocent bystander, or the other way, he kills himself, which is this occurred after he had created all this carnage.
Yeah, Bill, the idea that you could treat the shootings like on the street that we used to see in Manhattan or like with me in the Bronx, the same way as you would treat this kind of gunman is a disservice to the public. They're separate kinds of incidents. You got to handle them differently. One of the people in the chat asked the question about, will this provide impetus for meaningful discussion? And, going forward, maybe within Maine, there'll be some meaningful discourse, but nationwide, I don't think so going forward, because we have had these incidents many times, and they keep happening for various reasons, and because they're not all the same, but they happen for various reasons, and they end up with a lot of carnage. But it doesn't seem like we will have a meaningful discussion. I remember thinking back, maybe 12 to 15 years ago with the Newtown shooting, Sandy Hook shooting.
Yes.
Everybody expected there was going to be some sort of meaningful nationwide discussion, and it never really happened. After the shooting in Las Vegas with the gentleman who shot all those people from like a block away from the
It was
hotel.
over like 60 people. He shot him from his hotel room.
Right. This guy was
Yeah.
like a sniper. I think the only thing that came out of that was a bump stock ban.
What they're talking about here, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was it. So I'm a cynic as a police officer. I'm a cynic, and I don't think, unfortunately, I'd have to say, I don't think there's going to be a lot of meaningful discussion nationwide. Perhaps within Maine itself, some soul searching, but not nationwide. I don't think so.
Machine gun, and that legislation has not been enacted into law. There was an attempt to do it by regulation, but it was struck down by the courts. I still support the bump stock legislation. The other thing that I think we can look at is, and I advocated, was to increase the age at which you could purchase a high capacity rifle from 18 to 21, the way it is for a handgun.
Senator Collins, you mentioned verified laws used in this case. You are a big advocate of them. Do you know if they were used in this case?
I'm sorry.
Verified laws used in this case.
To mine, I don't know. That's a very good question.
You said that Maine got it right when it came to yellow flag.
Maine does have a good yellow flag.
If it's true, as we are hearing, that Robert Card had mental health issues and he was, the police put him forward for evaluation, you got it wrong.
No, I don't know whether there was a report to trigger the yellow flag law. It's certainly on the face of the facts that we have. It seems, could you let me finish, please? It certainly seems that on the basis of the facts that we have, that the yellow flag law should have been triggered if in fact the suspect was hospitalized for 2 weeks for mental illness. That should have triggered the yellow flag law, and he should have been separated from his weapons. I'm sure after the fact that's going to be looked at very closely. Obviously, that's a state issue.
You know, this is getting very over the top political, where it's not helping the conversation here. But this happens pretty much after all of these shootings. It becomes a Second Amendment argument, and one of the most important things here, of course, is these people on the screen right here and their families, and that's the most important thing. And it always becomes the talk about the Second Amendment, and I don't have the answers in regards to that. It seems like one side, when these things happen, their answer is to make more laws and more rules against law-abiding citizens, when the truth is they don't prosecute the real shooters and the real criminals that have guns. So, but when you look at this, here's a mentally ill person who was able to purchase guns, even though he had been hospitalized in a mental hospital that very summer. So something is extremely wrong right there, Mike.
Yeah, Bill, I was looking up Maine's gun law this afternoon in preparation for the show, and people who can't buy firearms are those previously convicted of domestic violence, serious juvenile delinquent offenses that would be serious crimes if they were an adult. Let's see, if you were ever convicted of a crime or judged not guilty by reason of insanity, or you were involuntarily committed to a state hospital. In Card's case, it appeared that he went voluntarily for mental health, for mental help, and therefore he didn't trigger the what they call the yellow flag law in Maine. So he fell through the cracks because he went there voluntarily, and he wasn't committed, with the police taking him there, and that sort of thing. So and then he went to buy a silencer. I think it was in August, and the summer of 2023, he was turned down for silencer because on a federal form called 4473, that's your background check form, he admitted that he had a diagnosable mental illness. And the one person who, and the gun store owner saw that and said, well, Mr. Card, you're not entitled to a silencer. And Card walked out of the gun store and without the silencer. So the one, entity in the state that actually followed the law and it was effective was the gun shop owner. And we can see, I mentioned earlier, like Chicago, Illinois has some of the most restrictive handgun laws in the nation. And look at the people in Chicago, ask them if their handgun laws are actually protecting them. It's a complicated situation. We don't have the answers here. It has a lot to do with our feelings of insecurity, our feelings as our culture of hunting, our own American culture, the idea that you need to have a gun and you should be entitled to have a gun to protect yourself and your family. There's all kinds of people's perspective, and that's just a few I mentioned, but it's a hard problem to solve, and it's not going to be solved anytime soon. And it's emotional. And these cases, like Mr. Card's, when this occurs, we look back and we see where the laws may be in place, but it doesn't mean that the person is going to be stopped from doing what they're going to do with a firearm.
100%.
Asking how the suspected shooter was able to own a gun despite his 2-week stay in a mental health facility just this past summer. Well, Maine does have a yellow flag law that establishes a process to take firearms away from a person during a mental health crisis. The process includes a police investigation, a doctor exam, and a judge's order. It's a process critics say really takes too long.
And if Robert Card had been prohibited from buying a gun, we do not have universal background checks in Maine, and he could have gone to a local corner, to a private dealer, and he would have been able to buy a gun illegally that way.
We're told Maine's gun laws are lax compared to other northeastern states which have red flag laws. They simplify the process, allowing relatives of a gun owner to directly ask a court to remove a gun during a mental health crisis. Others say it's the type of gun that's the issue. In this case, the suspect used an assault-style weapon. Maine Congressman Jared Golden, who previously opposed an assault weapons ban, says this shooting rampage has changed his mind.
The time has now come for me to take responsibility for this failure, which is why I now call on the United States Congress to ban assault rifles like the one used by the sick perpetrator of this mass killing in my hometown of Lewiston, Maine.
On the federal level, Congress passed a law last year after the shooting in Uvalde.
Mike, define for me what is an assault weapon. Define that to me. I don't know what it is.
Well, it's not. It doesn't have any exact definition, but what most, under like say federal law, but what most people say is it is a rifle that is capable of fully automatic fire, has a muzzle brake, a flash suppressor on the end, has a bayonet lug, so you could put a bayonet on it, has a pistol grip handle to support and aim the firearm, has an adjustable shoulder stock to adjust the length of pull from shoulder to trigger, and may also have a peg underneath the barrel to help direct fire. Also has the capacity, a magazine capacity. I think people usually say 12 rounds or 16 rounds. So that's just a conglomeration.
Right, that's a mouthful. I mean, that's a lot to put on. No, I'm saying.
Oh no, yeah.
You know, there is a definition in the penal law of what a firearm is.
Right.
It's any loaded weapon that is fully capable of discharging a projectile. That's the definition. Right. I don't know if I got it word for word.
No, you got it right. Yeah, that's it.
That's the definition of a firearm. So to define what an assault weapon is, it seems like you spoke for about 2 paragraphs there. There's a lot of things to include there.
Right.
So which does that include? A shotgun? Does that include a hunting rifle? Say that, and I'm not a gun buff and I don't know a lot about guns. I own 4 guns, 2 38s and 2 9s. That's the only guns that I was issued. Well, actually, I was issued to, the 9mm and the 38, and then I bought an off-duty and I bought a small baby Glock 9mm. But I'm not a gun buff, and I'm not so I don't know that much about guns, to tell you the truth. But whenever someone says assault weapon, it seems to encompass so many things that therein lies the confusion with a lot of this.
Exactly, because what happens if you have a semi-automatic firearm that is not convertible to fully automatic? You don't have a bayonet lug. You don't have a fire suppressor on the muzzle. You don't have a pistol grip handle. You don't have a peg handle underneath the barrel, and you don't have an adjustable shoulder stock. Then you don't have an assault weapon. If you're missing one of the things in that definition, then you don't have a what people consider an assault weapon. People have in their minds assault weapons, something that looks like what we had in the soldiers had in Vietnam, or the what do they call it?
It was an M16.
M16, that sort of thing. I couldn't think of it, but there's so many other.
You're older than me. You should have had that right at the tip of your tongue.
Yeah, I know, right? Like, but so I think everybody has a slightly different idea of what it is, and some people may say, "Well, you have a 22 caliber semi-automatic firearm that you might use to hunt small game." That's not an assault weapon. Somebody might say you have a mini 14 Ruger that shoots a 223 cartridge, which is really small to hunt deer. It's probably not even allowed in many states to use that to hunt deer. And that doesn't have half of the number of ingredients that would make up an assault, quote unquote, assault weapon, assault rifle. But people might look at it as an assault weapon. So it's really very difficult to come to a consensus of what people actually mean when they say an assault weapons ban. I think for shorthand, what they mean is a weapon with a high capacity magazine that can go fully automatic. I think like a Kalashnikov or something like that. I think that's kind of what they really mean.
I don't think they know what they mean. I think that they're misinformed about firearms in a lot of ways. And as I said, I am not a buff. I am not very knowledgeable about guns, even though, I carried one for 27 years. And when I still go into places that are unfamiliar and uncharted, I will be strapped. So that's it. But I'm licensed.
Right.
I'm licensed to carry in any state. Folks, if you are looking for a fantastic defense attorney in the New York metropolitan area, then Joe Murray is your man. Joe's a retired NYPD member of the service, a retired police officer, and he's a fantastic defense attorney. You can reach Joe on his cell phone at 718-514-3855. Email him at joe@jmurray-law.com, or go on his website, jmurray-law.com. Not only is Joe a great attorney, but he's a huge supporter of the Police Off the Cuff podcast, and he's been with us, supporting us for several years now. We really appreciate him. Let me play a little bit more.
Family contacted the sheriff's office back in May over concerns about his mental health and his access to guns as an Army reservist.
The sheriff and officials say they are now reevaluating policies and procedures, but this is renewed debate over the mentally ill and access to firearms. ABC News Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas joins us now. Pierre, this is just a shocking story. Well, what's the latest on it?
Well, I think the thing here that jumps out, Terry, is the fact that here's a case where people in law enforcement, people in the military were well aware that Robert Card was, in descending mental health status, that he had discussed acts of violence involving his fellow soldiers, that he was becoming paranoid. And the dominating thing that comes out of this, the infuriating thing, I'm sure, for people in Maine, is that the people who were in a position to do something about this knew and did not do enough.
So let's talk about that, because every time we cover a horrendous mass shooting like this of any kind, there was always some type of warning sign. Somebody knew something. So what are authorities going to do now that this is out on the table? There were numerous warning signs. What are they going to do to prevent this lack of follow through?
Well, when you hear the sheriff say that they're going to have to re-examine their policies, I think the community there is going to demand it. The more the community learns about this, remember, this is a community that was in hiding up until, Thursday, late Thursday, Friday, hiding, unable to even grieve. And the more information that comes out that this was shared with law enforcement and the military, the question will be, what was the follow through? When you're told the man is proficient at weapons. Some of the language I read from the documents the ABC News obtained spoke of him being a firearms instructor, someone who was clearly capable of using the weapons. But the focus seemed to be on him perhaps attacking fellow soldiers and not so much the broader community. Now, why they would rule that out, why they wouldn't focus on that as much, I don't know. But I think the thing that is clear is that there was not the kind of follow-up one would suspect it would need to happen in a case like this where someone has access to, military-style weapons and who is clearly, hearing voices, no less. That's a question that's going to be very difficult for law enforcement officials there and for the community at large.
Well, Pierre, hopefully that law enforcement can institute policies and practices. They ought to have done so already. But those are organizations that can stand up a defense against the mentally ill who shouldn't have access to firearms, having access to firearms. What about the public, though? I mean, as you point out, every one of these shootings, people knew, right? They say, see something, say something. But does there need to be almost like a civil defense aspect to this, where ordinary Americans have got to be trained or taught in a way to respond to the dangers of a mentally health friend, relative, neighbor having access to firearms?
But Terry, look at this case we're talking about. His family went to authorities.
Yeah.
They told the authorities he's a person that has issues and he has potentially access to firearms. So this is a question of will rather than anything else.
Good point.
Things definitely have to change, especially if you contact law enforcement. You expect of all people they will listen and follow through and do something. Appreciate it, Pierre.
Mike, it's this case, learning what we're learning about it right now, it's embarrassing. It really is embarrassing that this is the level of omission. I'll use that word again.
Right.
Omission that occurred here, that they did not do their job. They did not follow up. They did not take a dangerous, mentally ill person and at the very least remove his firearms, and even more so, perhaps have him reevaluated mental health wise. And I know all of this stuff is not easy. It seemed like, in New York City, we were protected by the mental hygiene law. And if we were called to a location and they said this is an EDP, an emotionally disturbed person, there were certain steps we would take, and we would get more information if the person was violent, if the person indicated an indication of causing harm to himself or others, we would kick it up a notch. But we certainly would not leave a location like that until we were satisfied that the situation was corrected.
Yeah, Billy, you probably did this as a sergeant. I did this, excuse me, as a sergeant with the mental health removal orders, where you'd go and you'd accompany that person, and they were going to the hospital because they already had a judge had already ruled that they were mentally incompetent and they were a danger. We also responded to many calls out on the street of a possible person who had emotionally disturbed problems. We call them EDP runs, and they didn't always end up going to the hospital because you would be there making a determination if they were going to be a danger to themselves or others, because no judge had already previously made this. But when it comes to weapons, and a person has a weapon, as a police officer, you tend to, and I can't obviously speak for everybody, but I would, it makes me nervous if I'm hearing that there's a person who has a mental health issue and they have a weapon. I'm going to treat that similarly to a crime in progress where there's a perpetrator with a weapon who may want to hurt me as I'm a law enforcement officer in uniform. I'm going to be much more on guard. I want to see that weapon. I want to make sure that person, I'm going to frisk them. I want to make sure that I clear that area. Law enforcement did not fulfill its obligation to the public in this respect. And it seems, as I was looking through the chronology, it seemed to be that second half of September where the wheels fell off the cart. The Army had done what it did. The police had gone to the home twice, didn't see him. They talked to the brother. It also seemed that I think law enforcement just figured it was kind of like a settled thing. The Army took care of it. The family's taking care of it. We're going to step back. And it just went to shit the second half of September. And here we are in October. And, it just didn't end well. And like everything, it ends nicely. No, it ended the way where when we look back on it, all the breadcrumbs were leading to what had happened. And that was the mass slaughter of 18 people. Law enforcement has to take responsibility for this one.
Absolutely.
And this entire region is still reeling and will be for some time. In fact, it could be some time for a lot of people who are able to move on, and that includes Maine's deaf community. In fact, this entire area wants the rest of the world to know what Lewis and Strong really means.
I was so humbled by that. It was beautiful. And Josh would have loved it.
Elizabeth Seal is talking about Sunday night's vigil at the largest church in Lewiston, packed with hundreds inside and hundreds more outside, to remember the 18 souls that died in last week's shooting, including her husband, Josh Seal, a member of the deaf community. Elizabeth spoke to us through an interpreter.
Family was everything for him. He loved his deaf community too, and was always supporting the deaf community needs. He was always there for friends, family.
Josh was the father of 4. He was with a group of deaf people on Wednesday night to enjoy a game of cornhole at Schmenge's bar. 3 others in his group died that evening as well. His wife wants people to remember who Josh was and how he lived his life.
If you have a dream, make a plan and do something about it. Reach out, connect, network. Don't just talk about it. Take the reins and do it. And that's how he was.
We can never allow Lewiston to be remembered for violence.
Speaking at Sunday night's vigil was Lewiston native Tom Caron. The Nesson and Red Sox broadcaster was chosen to speak at the event in hopes the world would understand what Lewiston Strong really means.
But Lewiston Strong is going to be how everyone in our community helps each other and helps each other get back up on their feet and move on in the aftermath and not let what happened this past week change the identity of who we are.
Now, the state and private agencies have come together and made a website to help families affected here in Lewiston by last week's shootings. If you'd like more information on that, you can find it on our website, WCVB.com. Live in Lewiston, Maine, I'm Ted.
So, this is again, we didn't hold back at all during the show. We tried to show uh, what went wrong here, and it seems that government is always trying to assess blame, but they want to really find out who's to blame first before they start pointing fingers. And one of the things that the police department should always do in any major investigation is to do an assessment on their response and what went right and what went wrong. And if they're honest with themselves, a lot went wrong here. A lot went wrong that allowed these 18 people on the screen um, to be murdered in a bar and in a bowling alley, just going about their life, trying to enjoy their life, and could again, woulda, shoulda, could have, but could have, should have this been prevented? And yes, I think so. I think it could have been prevented. And many, many mistakes were made, and many, many mistakes will be made in the next place there's an active shooter, because these are very difficult situations for law enforcement to become involved in. But you would hope that in the lead up to these situations, that they would make the right decisions, and when they would inject themselves into these situations so as to prevent the next active shooter situation. And I just always like to mention that we always want to remember that this case is about those 18 people on the screen and about the town of Lewiston, Maine, and how they will be healing now for a long period of time. And we pray for these 18 on the screen and their friends and families and the town of Lewiston, Maine. Mike, your final thoughts?
Billy, yeah, this is double tragedy because like in other cases where you may have a shooting, the person may not have telegraphed their feelings. The law enforcement may not have known at all until the actual shooting started. And what makes this doubly worse than others is that for several months, the law enforcement knew, the Army knew, and the response was not meaningful in any way, shape, or form by law enforcement, and that allowed the shooter to move forward and to kill. And that's the double tragedy, is that law enforcement actually had this guy on their radar and then lost him, and through their own negligence. And that's the sad part about it that makes the tragedy so much worse. And we have to pray for those families and pray for all those who are wounded, and hope that we can have some meaningful dialogue somewhere along the line. I doubt it, but pray that we do, to come to terms with our conflicting needs of our Second Amendment rights, our privacy expectations, the public necessity to have order, regulating firearms usage and availability, and enforcement of laws properly, and government accountability. We need all of those things to make the situation better. But keep your fingers crossed.
100%. Mike, I want to thank you for coming on, doing the show tonight. This is a tough topic to cover, folks. It's very sad, and unfortunately, we'll probably be covering other active shooter incidents across this nation. As I said, one happens at least every 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks in this country, and it's really, since Columbine, and it's been like on the radar screen, even though it goes even further back than that. I think it was on a water tower in Texas, happened in the 60s.
Right.
There was an active shooter, and I think that was one of the first ones. But it's not my point to go through the history of it. But it's not a new phenomena. However, the way that law enforcement and people have been trained to respond to it is relatively new. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff. On behalf of myself and Professor Mike Geary, have a great night and be safe.
Good night, everybody.
One episode just ain't enough.